to help our brothers throughout the land. Give peace a chance. Open up your heart and let love shine. Let's get into with the universe. We ain't got no. Oh, it's not easy, but we must try to give peace a chance. Give peace a chance and see what happens. We have our walls, and they are also. Let's live in
Okay,
peace
good evening, everyone.
and help our
It's about 5, so let's get started. Thanks for joining us today. We're happy to have you. My name is Leah Atnat, and I help to organize the state level of the Maryland History Day contest. I'm here tonight with my colleague, Emmy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emmy. I'm the Outreach and Professional Development Assistant that works with Leah for outreach at schools and with the contest.
All right. So it's our job to travel all over the state of Maryland and to make sure that students and teachers have all the resources they need to do History Day to the best of your ability. So this is just an extension of that. We're here for you guys tonight. We're going to give you guys some extra help about whatever you need. So this is our second ever student office hour that we're holding on YouTube Live. If you didn't get a chance to go to our first one back in November, we focused on doing the research for your project. So if you get a chance, that was recorded. You can go back on YouTube and watch it. If you still need some research tips, check it out. Tonight, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on those next steps. So after you do your research, what comes next? But we invite you to ask your questions about anything that you have a question on. So even if you are not done with your research yet, even if you're not in the writing phase, even if you're still just getting started, please feel free to drop in your questions. So we invite you to ask questions. To find where to do that, you're going to go onto the YouTube page, scroll down to the description, and in there should be a link to a Google form. And in that Google form, you can type in your question and send it right to us. We'll also ask for things like your topic, which might help us understand your question a little bit more. We ask for your name, and your first name is fine, but you don't even have to write that in if you don't want to. And we also ask for your county just because we like to know who we're reaching. If you cannot get into Google Forms for whatever reason, if you don't have a Google account, if your district blocks it on your device, we also have a phone number in the description on YouTube, which you can use to text us your question. And if you do that, again, if you could add in your county so that we know where you're at, that'd be great. But otherwise, we just want to know what you're curious about. So how this is going to work is me and Emmy have a few tips about the next steps in your project that we're going to share with you. So we're going to share a few tips, and then we're going to go back and forth and take your questions in between. So I'm going to start us off with a few tips. And the first category of tips that I wanted to talk about is about supporting your argument. So you all know that your project is not just going to be a collection of facts. There needs to be something that's tying everything together. There needs to be a narrative that you're telling. And there needs to be some claim that you're supporting throughout the whole project. So here are my tips for supporting your argument. My first tip is to start with an outline. And it may seem really simple, but this is an excellent way to get your thoughts organized before you sit down to write this out in paragraph form. So think about all the points that you want to make. Think about all the pieces of the story that you want to talk about. And think about all the primary sources that you want to use throughout your whole project. And how you're using primary sources, that might be as direct quotes. It might be through the summary of a primary source that you read that you think really helps the reader understand one part of your story. It could be a visual that you want to use in a specific part of your project. You can outline all of that out before you start, just so that when you get to putting together the final project, you already know where everything is going to go. Okay, my next tip is for when you're in the writing phase. So after you've done your writing, I would ask you guys to read over your work and ask yourself, does this sound like an encyclopedia entry? So this goes back to what I just said. It should not just be a collection of random facts. It should not just be a dry retelling of the facts of a story that everyone already knows. You want to make sure that that argument shines through and that it's clear that you are trying to make a point. My next tip, are there too many fun facts? This is another thing you should ask yourself. Are there too many fun facts or tangents that you go off on that distract from your argument? For your project, you have a limited number of words with which to make your point. And fun facts don't usually help to support the thesis. You want to make sure that everything you have works to support your thesis. And if the facts that you have don't help you support your thesis, you might need to cut them out because you want everything to flow together. You want everything to be cohesive. You don't want to branch off in too many different directions. My next thing that I want you to consider as you are rereading your work, think about this. Do you rely too much on other historians to tell the story for you? So this is what happens when you use too many secondary sources and not enough primary sources. For the History Day project, we are really asking you guys to be the historians. So we don't want to hear so much about what the other historians have to say. We want to see that you have looked at the primary sources, those direct, those documents that tie us directly to that event. We want to see that you have interpreted them on your own and that you have your own story to tell about how those sources and events fit together. If you just paraphrase a bunch of secondary source, you're not being the historian yourself. You're leaning too much on the work that other historians have done. And my last thing that you should consider when you're thinking about your argument is, do you use primary sources to tell your story and support your argument? So that goes along with a couple of the things that I just said. Are you actually looking at primary source documents? Are you thinking about how they help you tell your story? Are you paraphrasing them and telling us how everything fits together in your own words? Those are some things for you to consider as you're working on your projects, as you're putting together all this work that you've done, and making sure that you have a solid, spot-on argument that's going to do well at the contest. Okay, and I just have one more slide to show. So going back to this idea of writing an outline, I just wanted to show you guys this graphic. And some of you might have already seen this. Your teacher might have shared some version of this with you. This is a graphic organizer, and it's actually for the exhibit category, if you've already decided which format you want to do. But I like to show it to all students because I think it's useful for everyone, because all of you, no matter what format you're doing, no matter what your topic is, all of you need to have some of these basic elements of your story in your project. So you're all going to have a thesis statement, and then you're all going to try to bring in the beginning, middle, and end of the story, which in this case means the historical context and the buildup to your main event. That main event that you chose at the beginning of the school year when you were starting your project. And then for the end of the story, it's like the short and long-term impacts. How did that event change history? What significance does it have? So this could be a place to start when you're doing your outline, if your teacher hasn't already provided you with some other way to outline it, like this graphic organizer. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to open it up and see if we have any questions yet. And it looks like we've got one question. It says, how can I decide what format to do? And Emmy, I don't know if you want to take a stab at this one, if you have any tips, and then I can jump in.
Yep. So one piece of advice that I would say for deciding which format to present your topic in would be really just think about how your topic played out, and if it would maybe be something that would look better visually, or if it's very kind of detail oriented and very heavy topic, then it might be better as a paper or a website where you can really rely on all of that text and show all of the details. But if it's something that's maybe a bit more creative, or if you're a very visual person, then the website could be good, or a documentary or performance as well, if you have a lot of photos and visuals for your topic. And one good place to look is the rule book will tell you all of the things you need for each format. So you can really see what elements you'd have to make for each format.
Emmy, you were cutting out a little bit for me. Isabella, was she cutting out for you?
Yes, I
Or was
also
it just
got
me?
some of that.
Okay, sorry about that, Emmy. But I did hear some of your main points. And if you guys at home didn't hear a couple of the main things that I just want to reiterate again, is that for the format, it depends on what your own talents and skills are and interests. So what skills do you want to develop while you're working on this project? Are you good at, are you tech savvy? Are you good at tech things? Do you think you can put together a website or a documentary? Are you artistically oriented? Do you think you would rather make an exhibit board? Are you good at theater? Do you want to write a performance? But then also, one of the things that Emmy said was which format lends itself well to your topic. And that might depend on the time period, because that will influence what types of primary sources you can find. If you're doing a topic that's from 200 years ago, you're not going to find any video clips. So a documentary might not be the best choice for that. But if you've got a more modern topic that took place in the 80s or 90s, you might find lots of interview or news clips or things that would look really good in a documentary. So think about those sorts of things, but ultimately it is up to you. Whatever you want to do is most important, because we want you guys to stay excited about it. Any other questions for now, Isabella? Okay, no more questions for now. So I'm gonna hand it over to Emmy again. And Emmy, I'll let you know if you're if your audio starts cutting out again, and I might take over if I need to. Okay.
Okay, hopefully it works. It just rebooted me, so hopefully I'll stay connected and won't cut out. So the next tip we wanted to share is some information about citing your sources, because now that you've kind of done most of your research, you're really getting into that point of putting it all together. One big thing you need to put together is your annotated bibliography. And so the first tip that we have is to write those annotations as you go. So rather than waiting until the end and putting all of it together at once, it's good that as you're looking back at your sources, you're working through the information, start to write those annotations of what you're using as you're using that information. It'll really make the process a lot easier once you get to kind of finishing up your entire project. And then our next tip for you guys is that your annotations should show that you understand a source and how it fits into your story. So you don't want to just summarize the source, because that's kind of what you're already doing in your project. You're pulling that information, you're putting it into the project as evidence. And so the annotation, you really want to show how you used the source and kind of where you placed it in that bigger picture, rather than just doing a little summary of the details you pulled. You want it to show your understanding and how you utilized it. And then our next tip is that it can be good to keep doing some more research, even if your teacher isn't asking for new sources. So you probably have already kind of gotten into the research stage. You might be wrapping it up and getting to the point of putting your project together, but that doesn't mean the research needs to stop. It can always be good to find new sources. And as you start putting things together, you might notice that there's one spot that maybe needs a little bit more support. You need some more evidence. You maybe need photos or statistics. And so it's always good that just because you're done your research, that doesn't mean you have to stop totally. You can always go look for more information if you find that you need it. And then our next tip is to make sure that you have a variety of sources. So you want to make sure that there's a lot of different places you pulled information from, especially in your primary sources, because for your project. And so you want to look at what types of sources are you using. Are there a lot of photos? And that would kind of be something where how you ask about project type is if you maybe have a very visually heavy topic, then a documentary or a website could be good. Or you might have a lot of documents. If it's maybe something political, there's a lot of laws and documents and letters around it. And so it's always good that if you have a lot of one type, maybe try to find a few others to have some variety to the sources and have a little bit something different to your topic. It's also good to make sure that you have a variety of points of view so that you really get that whole picture. So if you have a lot of letters from maybe one side of a topic or one person, try to find some from other points of views or maybe the other opinion in your topic to help support and show the whole picture. And it's always good to make sure you have a variety of places you found your information, because not everywhere is going to have the same sources available. And so you might find a different primary source that you hadn't come across if you try digging into some other sites. And along with this tip, one place we recommend looking is if you go to our website, mdhumanities.org, under programs, we have a page for Maryland History Day. And on that site, under that page, we have a section about conducting research where we list a whole bunch of different archives and museums and their websites that have plenty of good primary sources for you to utilize. And so Leah's got this pulled up right here. If you go to For Students, and then under that tab, there's a section for research with all of those different sites available, that if one of them is somewhere that's new to you that you maybe haven't already looked, then that could be a good place to do a quick little search. If you're kind of finding that you need a different source, a different point of view, you maybe need some additional source for one of your points in your project, then one of these sites might hopefully help you out.
Okay, thank you, Emmy. And then we had just one more slide to go along with that, just to show you guys what an annotation might look like. So you might have heard this term in your classroom. You need to write an annotated bibliography for your project. And you might have never done that before, but it's not as hard as it sounds. So you've probably written a bibliography where you list all of the sources that you use to create your project. You need to know the author, the title of the work, the year it was written, and some publishing information. So here you're going to have citations like that, and then just a short annotation of just about 2 sentences, summarizing what the source has to say and telling us how you fit it into your project. So that's what you can see here in this example. Okay, Isabella, are there any questions yet? Okay, so we got one question that came in that says, is it okay if I don't have a video source in a documentary? And I would say, yes, it is okay. You can use just images, but you want to make sure you have something to show your audience. And if you have video editing software, you can make it look like the camera is drifting across an image. This is called a pan. And that's a way to bring more visual interest to a subject where you don't have any videos, where you just have still images. So it's definitely still possible. You might have even seen some documentaries from about periods that took place long, long ago, so there aren't any videos available. But if you like, you can also break it up with things like interviews, people talking about the subject. If you can find any audio recordings, that also might bring a different touch to your documentary. But it's not obligatory that you have videos in your documentary. All right, the next question is, how do I get an interview? That's a really good question. So to interview someone, you can think about the people who are in your life, who are a little bit older, who might have witnessed a historical event or lived through a historical time period that you're interested in. So, for example, and it doesn't need to be a big event. You don't need to interview someone who, went to a White House state dinner. That's not the only kind of history that's out there. Everyone experiences history in some way. So your parents lived through something, your grandparents lived through something, even if it's just the day-to-day parts of history. But that can include some big important things that you might want to write about. For example, school desegregation. So my parents lived through the era of school desegregation. I could actually interview them and ask what their experience was, what it was like to finally have Black and white students in the same classroom. Was it hard for their classmates? Were there any difficulties? So think about the people in your life who you could interview. But you might also want to reach out to people you don't know who were involved in big events. And I always, I like to tell my students, a few years ago, we had an NHD student in Maryland who actually got the chance to interview Stan Lee, who was the creator of Marvel Comics. And this was a few years before he died. But she just, reached out to, probably through his website or something, emailed someone who works with him, emailed his assistant, and got the chance to talk with him on the phone. So it is possible to talk to these people who you might never think possible. We also had a student interview John Lewis a few years ago, the great civil rights leader who recently passed away. So it definitely is possible. And it might be a matter of, asking your teacher how you might get in touch with that person, or looking for information about them on the internet. And Emmy, do you want to share a little bit about that as well?
Yep, so I just had one other place that might be useful to look, depending on if your topic is maybe something that relates more to daily life or something that individuals in America would have lived through. Then a local historical society or a smaller museum might also be a good source, because Usually a good amount of the people that work at those places are a bit older, or they might be friends with other local individuals that are really interested in history and would definitely love to help students with a project and would be willing to probably give you an interview on that topic if they happen to be a part of it or witness something about it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great tip. Okay. If there are no questions right now, I just wanted to share one resource that's related to citing your sources and doing your annotated bibliography. So I'm just going to go back to my web browser really quickly. And one website that I like to direct students towards is Purdue University's online writing lab. And so the URL for that is OWL, like the bird owl, .purdue.edu. And OWL here stands for Online Writing Lab. So I'm going to click through here. And this writing lab has a huge guide for how to do citations, whether you're using MLA style or Chicago style, and both are acceptable. And it can show you how to cite just about any type of source you can think of, whether that's a primary or secondary source, whether it is a law or a Supreme Court case or a recording or a verse in the Bible. They'll tell you how to cite just about everything. So I like to share this with students as well. It's owl.purdue.edu. Okay, so I'll go back for our last tip. And then after that, we'll take some more questions. So here's our last tip for you. So now that you've done a bit of research, it's time to start thinking about how everything is going to come together in the end. So it's time for you to start designing your final project. My first tip for you is to think, and we just got a question about this, so this will be a reminder, which format will best help you tell your story? And I have those 5 formats up there on the screen for you. If you haven't talked about them too much with your teacher yet, that's okay. So we've got an exhibit, which is like a museum exhibit, something that's physical on a cardboard trifold. You can use lots of visuals. It's great if you're artistically minded. The website, for which you would use the NHD Web Central platform. And that works really similarly to Wix and Google Sites and Weebly and all these other kinds of web building platforms. It's very user-friendly, drag and drop elements. You don't need to know how to code, even if you're a first-time website builder. That is an option for you. The documentary. And for this one, you can use any video editing software that you have available to you. You might have one available through your school. If you really don't have any video editing software available to you, the low-tech version is to make a slideshow like I have today, and to record your voice on it and then download the whole thing as a video file. That can count as a documentary. Performance is the most creative one of the bunch because what you're writing is not going to be strictly nonfiction. You can be more creative and put words into the mouths of these historical figures you're writing about. And then the paper is the most straightforward, but it's great if you really want to hone your writing skills. So think about, your own interests, but also think about the sources you're able to find and which one will really highlight your story the best. My next tip is to collect and organize the materials that are going to help to support your work. So if you're an exhibit, that means collecting all the images and maybe pictures of documents that you want to put on your exhibit board. Same thing for the website. If you're doing a documentary, that might also mean collecting all the video clips that you want to use. And for any of these, it might mean collecting quotes, pull quotes that you want to add to your project. Make sure you have all those in order so that everything will come together smoothly in the end. And then finally, think about what your vision is for the final project. And this is your chance to get really creative. You know, your project can look totally different from any other project you've seen. So think about what steps you need to take in order to achieve it. And you can make little checklists for yourself so that you know what you still have to do, because only you are the only one who knows what you need to do to achieve this big vision that you have. At this point, you've moved beyond what your teacher can tell you. Your teacher can help you with the research, but if you want to do something really mind-blowing, it's up to you to put it all together. Okay, so that was our final tip. So again, I'll open it up. And Isabella, are there any more questions? Looks like there aren't any questions for now. I'm going to share one more resource with you guys. So I'm going back to my web browser, and I'm going to thinkport.org/TPS. So you can see the URL at the top there. And this is a resource that our organization helped to create. I think in the last office hour, I showed you guys the inquiry kits, which are these primary and secondary source sets on over 200 topics. So you might find your topic among one of those sets there. But today, I'm going to take you over to the research learning modules. So I'm going to click through, and each of these is like a little interactive activity that's going to help give you reminders about certain different parts of the research project process. So including things like writing your thesis statement. If you want to go back to your thesis and freshen it up, or if you haven't written it yet and you want a little teaser of what that's going to look like, you can check that out. But for this topic today, the ones of interest are creating a research project, which again is going to help you start to think about which formats might be best for you. And then also using primary sources as evidence. So this goes back to that first tip that I talked about how you want to use those primary sources to help you support the argument that you're making. And so in here, one of these pages shows you a primary source. It's a letter, and they've actually highlighted some of the quotes that they found the most telling, the quotes that tell us the most about this time period, about this topic, that we could pull out and use as quotes in our project, or that we could summarize in order to support our argument about this. So I just wanted to show this to you guys so that you can use this to improve your own skills in using primary sources as evidence. All right, am I frozen? All right. All right, Emmy, did you have another tip that you wanted to give?
Yep, so you had one other question for this that I actually have also received in outreach as well, is that issue of when you have so many different resources and you've done a lot of research and you just don't quite know how to organize it or where to go with your research, because it really can be a little overwhelming when you have, you know, a lot of different ways that you could take your project, a lot of angles that you could work on. And so one thing that we'd recommend is utilizing some kind of an outline is really a great way to help you organize your thoughts and your opinions about your argument, where you can break down all of the different sides and then put your sources that match those parts of your topic with that. And so one way to narrow down your argument and sorry.
You're cutting in and out a little bit. Maybe if you're using headphones, if you want to pull them out and put them back in, or
Here I can
or you might just stop your video. I don't know if that would help.
Yeah, video that usually fixes the issue for me. But what I was saying is for narrowing down your argument, one really good way to do that is to use the outline and how we mentioned outlining earlier for kind of organizing all of your thoughts is outline all of the different areas you have as part of your topic, all of the ways that you could kind of branch out and make an argument, and then look through your research and your sources and kind of match them up with each part. So see what sources, how much evidence you have for all of the different ways that you're kind of thinking about taking your argument. And then good way to narrow it down is see what part of your topic you have the best support for. And then that might kind of be, even subconsciously, that might have been where you sort of wanted to take the argument in the first place, is whatever you have actually found the most sources for. And another thing that can be a good tip, if you kind of find that you have a lot of ways to take your topic and you really, really are just stuck on like you really like two of them, they really are both good ideas, is see if they maybe contrast each other. Where I saw that recently with a group is that they had a lot of different areas for one person's life that they were looking at. And then the way that we worked out them doing it is looking at how that person was affected and then looking at how they were affected outwardly and kind of how people were viewing them and the things that they did in their life. So kind of taking those parts, and if you can maybe identify two that work together or two parts of your topic that kind of contrasted each other, that could be another way to kind of work in some more of that information if you're really just stuck on where to take your argument.
All right, excellent. Thank you for that, Emmy. All right, any other questions coming in, Isabella? Okay, no questions for now. All right, I'm going to go back to my web browser in that case. And another thing that I wanted to point out to you is that if you're at this point where you are trying to design what your final project will look like, but you don't know where to start and you don't really know what's possible yet, my suggestion is to look at some sample projects that have already been done. So I'm opening up a new tab and I'm going to mdhumanities.org. That's our website again. I was there earlier. And at mdhumanities.org, I'm hovering over programs and clicking on Maryland History Day, which is what I did before. And again, I'm going to the For Students tab. And this time I'm looking over here, I'm still in the left column menu, and I'm going to click on Sample Projects. And scrolling down in Sample Projects, we have this Padlet that is embedded in the page here. And this Padlet has sample projects covering every category and both grade level. So both the middle school junior level and the high school senior level. So you can see the types of projects that students have done in past years. And some of these are from just this past school year. Some of them are a little bit older. You can see that this documentary about Alexander Graham Bell won first place at the state contest just this past school year. And these are all Maryland students. These are all students from our state. Many of these went on to join the national contest, which is a really huge honor because only about 60 students in Maryland make it to the national contest out of 27,000 who do the project. So if you're looking for some inspiration, if you want to see the students who did a really exemplary job of putting a project together, take a look at some of these sample projects. So we've got an awesome documentary here some exhibits that get really creative with shape and form that you can see here. Another exhibit, and this one is virtual from this past school year. This year we are asking students to make physical exhibits again. You can find examples of papers from past years. And finally, performances. So remember, performances are really the most creative thing. You get to think about the props and costumes you would use, the different characters you would take on. So take a look at some of these. I highly recommend it. Okay, so we got a question about multiple perspectives, and you guys might know that this is a newer rubric criteria. And I'm actually just gonna pull up the rubric so you guys can see what it looks like in case you haven't had a look at it yet. So at this point, I'm going to nhd.org, which is the National History Day website. And we get all of our rules and judging rubrics from them. And I'm going to go to, let's see, I'm clicking on for students, and I think I can find it under project categories. Okay, and in the right-hand column over here where it says NHD evaluation form, okay, this one is just for documentaries, but when I click through, I'll show you. The first 8 criteria under historical quality are the same no matter what format you are doing. So documentary, exhibit, etc., they all have the same criteria in this section. So you should all have a thesis, you should all connect to the theme, you should all have wide research, including primary sources. And when we come back down here, you see that one of the criteria is about multiple perspectives. And the exemplary version of this is having varied perspectives that are consistently included throughout the project. So how can you do that? There are a couple different ways. One way to do it is to, if you're doing a really mainstream history, if you're doing a really well-known story that all your classmates know, that you maybe learned about in your history book, might be something like the story of George Washington or the story of the Civil War or of the US's involvement in World War II. These are all stories that we learn about in our history classes. So showing multiple perspectives might mean telling some stories that are not the ones that show up in our history books. What stories are left out? So it might be things like women's involvement in the Civil War or in World War II, or Black soldiers in the Civil War. Their stories don't always get told. So we want to make sure to highlight different perspectives. Another way to do that might be to just focus on that unknown story or unheard story as the main part of your project, not just saying that they existed, but really centering them and bringing the most attention to them. So those are a couple of ways to show multiple perspectives. Emmy, I don't know if you want to add on to that at all.
I was going to say, one thing to really think about is that a big way to see it is kind of that idea of like the winner writes history is something you might have heard before. There's always going to be that one dominating perspective about a lot of topics in history. So it's always good is really think about what the story you're seeing is, think about who was involved in it, and then look at whose voices you're not seeing in that. And like Leah said, for like a war, everybody knows, like, okay, for a lot of historical wars, the male soldiers were the ones going off to fight. So who was left not playing a kind of quote unquote active role in the war? But when you actually dig into that research, you'll find that many, many more people than just those soldiers fighting were actively involved. They're just kind of not what usually is highlighted. And this can also be a good way, how I was mentioning, is kind of for your argument, having sort of contrasting sides. is that can be a good way to incorporate perspectives to your topic, is you can kind of focus on that story as it's told, and then have your focus be that there is another side to that story. And that can be a really good way to incorporate those perspectives you find into the project as you're actually writing it.
Excellent. All right. Well, while I am talking about NHD and on this official website, this is another place where you can find sample projects. So, I've showed you projects that made it to the Maryland state level. If you want to see what it takes to get to the national level, I'm at nhd.org again, hovering over for students and then going over to project examples. And here they have examples from several past years. They don't have the 2021 projects up yet because they wait a year, but you can see the 2020 projects with the theme of breaking barriers. And you can just bring down these lists and actually, look at these projects from all over the country and see the great work that these other students have done. And again, this can help you get some inspiration for what to do with your own project.
I was going to say one other little tip that I have for this one that just came out in a recent outreach session was, what is a good project if you're very hands-on creative? So if you really like crafting, creating art projects, then you actually can do a lot with exhibits that you might not expect to. Because when people think, the typical trifold board, they just think something simple, you're pasting text and pictures onto the board. But for a lot of these History Day projects, students will go all out with those exhibit boards and really make it almost into an art piece about their project. And so they'll incorporate all different decorative elements onto it. Some will even have video clips or sounds that play. And so if you really like to be creative and more of a hands-on arts and craft way, then that can be a really good example. And so we've got some up here now that show what I mean is incorporating lights into it, that one for the Berlin Wall with even the barbed wire on top so that you feel like you're looking at it as you read about it. So there's a lot of creativity that can go into these boards that is way more than you might originally think just looking at the rule book. So they can be really good option as well if you're maybe a little more shy, not a performance type, but you really want to be creative and bring that into your project.
Excellent. Yeah. And I will say, though, that there are a lot of ways to be hands-on creative with a performance as well. You can see the little image that we have in the middle here is a couple of students who did a performance last year on Nellie Bly, the journalist who investigated insane asylums where women were being interned. And you can see they designed their own backdrop here. They designed what costumes they wanted to wear. Maybe they didn't make the clothing themselves, but it was about knowing what combination of clothing would look the most authentic to that time period, picking out the props that would look the most authentic, and painting that backdrop. So that's another way to get really creative if you are brave enough to do a performance and to perform it in front of judges at the contest. All right. Oh, let's see, an example of doing creative writing for a paper. That's a really good question. And I believe I've got an example in here. So I'm just going to read out, I've got a really great introduction paragraph, and I'll just read it out for you all to hear. And we can look at the different parts of it. So it says, Rene Descartes dipped his quill pen into the ink. This is one thing which I believe the ancient mathematicians did not observe, he wrote, for otherwise they would not have put so much labor into writing so many books in which the very sequence of the propositions shows that they did not have a sure method of finding all, but rather gathered together those propositions on which they had happened by accident. What is the thing that the early mathematicians had missed? It was analytic geometry, a method invented by Descartes that used algebraic equations to describe geometric objects. Descartes discovered that he could solve difficult mathematical problems using this method. The key idea was to use coordinate axes to bring algebra and geometry together. This was an innovation that enabled mathematicians to solve complex problems and invent new forms of mathematics, such as calculus, which laid the foundation for modern science and technology. So this is sort of an unexpected topic. You might not think to do your history project about math, but I just want to highlight some of the elements of this introduction that make it so great. So first, we've got the opening sentence, and we've got a little bit of like a little snippet of historical fiction here. It's just setting the stage for us. We can picture it in our minds. It's very concrete. We can imagine Descartes dipping his feather quill into a little pot of ink in order to write. Next thing we've got is a direct primary source quote. So I've been telling you, you can pull out primary source quotes, use them as evidence throughout your whole project. This is a great way to incorporate primary sources into your work. Then we've got, what is the thing that early mathematicians had missed? We've got a rhetorical question. So it's got your readers questioning themselves. It's drawing them in and making them want to read so that they can get the answer to that rhetorical question. Next thing we've got is an answer to the question. And not only that, but we've got a description, we've got a definition of what analytic geometry is, so that the reader can follow along and understand this argument. So I'll say this for all of you. If you're introducing new terms or new language in your thesis statement, make sure to define it so that your reader knows what you're talking about. And then finally, we have got our thesis statement at the end. So this introduction paragraph is great because it brings together all these different elements that help to draw the reader in, get them interested, and make them want to keep reading this paper. Even though it's about something like math, which might not be interesting to everyone. So I found this to be a really excellent example. All right. Is there anything else we can share with you all right now? I would say, Isabella, if there are no other questions, we might just wrap up a little bit early today. I'll go back to my original PowerPoint. All right. So I'm going to put if I can find it. Give me just a second. Music to close out. And I'll put my slide back up. So that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for joining. If you'd like to join us next time, our next office hour will be Thursday, January 13th at 5 p.m. after we get back from our relaxing holiday break. And to get informed about that new office hour coming up, please subscribe to the Maryland Humanities YouTube channel. Click the bell so you can get notifications about new events, new videos